Wonderful. You'll notice down the bottom of your screen there is a chat icon. So if you have any questions during that sort of occur to you, please feel free to utilise those, and then I can feed them to Derek. Derek will be doing the majority of the presentation. Quickly introduce myself. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Judy Brown. I'm one of the directors of Governance Junction here, and of course Derek is the other director of Governance Junction. Derek, who will be doing our presentation today, has spent his career working with charities and not-for-profits both in Australia and overseas. He has over 20 years experience in explaining and showing to not-for-profits and charities methods in remaining viable and transparent through policy changes and improvements and through financial understanding. So I'd like to introduce Derek.
Thank you, Judy. I'm just sharing my screen here, everybody. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll just say, given this topic today is our first one, and it's a fairly light topic, I guess. So happy to take questions through the presentation. So if you just want to put into the chat, raise your hand or something, I'll just let Judy know and she'll stop me in my ramblings to answer any questions that you may have. So welcome to our first of our governance webinars for not-for-profits. Today's topic, we're going to talk about, probably a simple concept for some, but many of the people we deal with and come across this concept isn't so simple, isn't so easily understood. But it's, am I a charity or not-for-profit? So this is the first of a series, and we hope to have these about every 2 weeks around lunchtime, just for 30 minutes or so, just to talk about some basic concepts around governance, particularly for not-for-profits. We don't see a lot of resources that are targeted for not-for-profit organisations around this space. And so some of the webinars we have coming up is, the next one will be about structure. What's the best structure for not-for-profits? A common question that I get asked, and what we aim to do is help a lot of not-for-profits as they're starting up to make the best decisions possible in those early days, because we find ourselves having to undo perhaps poor decisions that were made in the early days. So we're looking at that. We'll look at things like social purpose, which is, in my mind, one of the most important aspects, and what defines a not-for-profit is its purpose, and how important that is, both in terms of things like registration, which we're going to talk about today, but also just in general in terms of alignment. We're going to talk about some basic governance principles, again, trying to clear up some of the myths that are out there, what makes for a good constitution or a good set of rules. We'll look at boards, directors, executive committees, how do they differ, what are the duties and responsibilities of both, and then talk about conflicts of interest. And, there's a lot to talk about there. Today, though, I'm going to refer to boards and directors, just so it makes it easier for the flow of my presentation today. From a governance perspective, whether you're on a board or whether you're on a committee, whether you're called a director or you're called a committee member, from a governance perspective, actually makes no difference at all. And so I'm not going to try and get myself tangled up in those terms today. I'm just going to talk about boards and directors, and please understand I'm referring to committees and committee members on associations and such. So let's get into it. Am I a charity or a not-for-profit? Why they're not the same thing? So the question is, charity, not-for-profit, these are just words really used to describe the thing, right? That's many people interchange those terms all the time. But in actual fact, they are actually different things. You can be a not-for-profit, but not a charity. We'll talk about why you possibly would do that or why that happens later, but you can actually, they are two actually separate things. To be a charity, you need to be endorsed. You need to register with the ACNC, the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. and the Australian Tax Office. And if that's done in one step, it's usually all handled for you in one step, principally by the ACNC. But if you're not, if you have a structure that is not for profit, but you haven't registered with the ACNC, then you are not a charity and can't take advantages of having that charity status. So what is a charity? Well, a charity is a legal business entity that is a not-for-profit company structure. So what does that mean? Where is that defined? Well, your definition of a not-for-profit is in your constitution or in your rules. And it's very clear in there in terms of you're a not-for-profit, irrespective of your charity status, you can't distribute funds back to members. So in a commercial organisation, they exist to deliver a return, so deliver monies back to shareholders. In a not-for-profit, that is the fundamental difference, is that you can't do that. And regardless of your structure, regardless of the entity, that will be in your constitution, which spells that out pretty clearly. A not-for-profit also has objects or has purposes. Commercial organisations have these as well, but in a not-for-profit, they're so important. And those spell out the charitable purpose for public benefit. And this is a verbatim definition of what a charity is. So it has a charitable purpose for public benefit, or it aids or furthers such benefit. So that is the definition from the ACNC and from the Tax Office about what a charity is. It also doesn't have anything in its purpose that may disqualify it from being a charity. And when I say that, what they in particular that the ACNC will be looking for is anything that may indicate that in some way monies or whatever are going back to members, or monies are going to other aspects of the business that may disqualify it from being a charity. Also, a charity cannot be an individual. It can't be a political party. It can't be a government entity. And when we say individual, we're talking about, an individual in particular with, as a sole trader or a partnership with an ABN. What is the structure of a charity? There's a lot of different corporate structures available. And in fact, in our next webinar in 2 weeks' time, we'll talk about this exact issue, because from my perspective, in dealing with a lot of not-for-profits and helping them, through the ever increasing complexities of corporate governance in Australia, it is probably one of the single biggest questions that I get asked, or one of the single biggest aspects to a organisation that I have to undo, which is their structure. So we'll talk about that more next webinar. But regardless of that structure, it doesn't really matter. To obtain the benefits of being a charity, you must, one, be registered as a charity with the ACNC and be endorsed by the ATO for the tax concessions. And so essentially being a charity gives you those concessions of being tax-free. And of course, there are a few other benefits and things along the way. When the ACNC looks at whether you qualify as a charity, it looks at your purpose. And this is why in a few webinars, we're going to talk about your social purpose, because it is so important. But in recent times, the ACNC and the Tax Office are taking a closer look. They're putting more scrutiny around this, but they're looking for you. They're looking for your organisation in its purpose to fit into one of 14 possible categories. The last two at the bottom, 13 and 14, are probably a higher level of charity purpose than the first 12. And they are particular definitions for those. And they also bring with it perhaps more concessions, more tax concessions and such. But you must fit into one of those 12 categories, and your purpose, your social purpose or your objects must be carefully written so that the ACNC looks at it and it's really got to jump off the page and say, oh yeah, I see what they're doing. They actually fit into, number 5, or it could be a case of 2 and 5 and 6. It may look at several categories in which you'll qualify as a charity. So the ACNC Generally, my recent experience with them is one of trying to get you across the line with this, but it also helps if the social purpose is written in such a way that it stands out and it's quite obvious to them of where you fit. It just makes their job easier and makes the process, and any process with government is difficult and slow, but it makes this process a lot more smoother. So if it is not a charity, what's a not-for-profit? Because as we said, these terms charity and not-for-profit are quite interchangeable, and people in the community share these terms and think they're the same thing. But really it comes down to the tax status of the entity. So if you're a charity and you're endorsed by the ACNC and therefore subsequent to that the ATO, then you get the tax benefits of that in being not having to complete a tax return or pay tax. A not-for-profit organisation, or one that is not registered with the ACNC, is not tax exempt. It must self-assess its tax status. In other words, every year it has to go through the process of determining whether, or having the tax office determine whether it should pay tax or not. These are called non-charitable not-for-profit entities, and they're still not-for-profit. So even though they're not a charity, they still cannot distribute profits to members. That is the core aspect of being a not-for-profit. They may still get some tax relief and such. It's just that it is not as simple as being a charity. Where would this happen? Well, it could happen in certain not-for-profits that are sporting clubs. Sorry?
Sorry, I thought we were on mute. Sorry.
Oh, no, right. Sorry, you're right. It could be sporting clubs or educational institutions. Some of these are not charities, but they are not-for-profits. Your local bowls club or something, etc. May not fit those 14 categories that we showed you before, but may still be a not-for-profit and enjoy some of the benefits of that. Other times that I've seen recently is that organisations have thought they've been registered as a charity with the ACNC, and they thought that the founders or directors past have done that and discovered they haven't, or that they've actually been deregistered by the ACNC, and it was unknown to the current board members that was the case. It could be that they felt there was too much of a reporting burden by being registered and they didn't want that. It could be they didn't know that they had to do that. They thought that just by being a not-for-profit and being established and administered perhaps by the state government, that they didn't need to do this. And so there are reasons why a not-for-profit may not be registered as a charity. Some very valid reasons, and some just simply, as I said, a bit of ignorance there in terms of the status of what their organisation is about. Whatever the case, the focus is on that purpose, detailed in the Constitution or in your rules. And as I said, in a couple of weeks or a couple of webinars in advance, we'll talk about that Constitution. We'll talk about those rules because they are quite an important aspect. Even if you've got a Constitution or a set of rules that have been around for some time, you may find yourself having to have your Constitution or your rules being re-evaluated by the ACNC. You may go for what is called DGR status, which we were talking about before, and in which case you may require changes to those legal documents. Okay, so if I'm a charity and I can raise funds, and can I raise funds and promote that my donations to my cause are tax deductible? Well, no. Just because you're a charity doesn't mean you can raise funds, certainly, but you can't promote that those donations that are given to you, those gifts, are tax deductible. To do that, your charity must be endorsed as what is called DGR status, and this comes from the tax office. This is called deductible gift recipient status. This endorsement can be done at the time your charity is registered. In fact, the ACNC will handle it for you and deal with the tax office. So they'll talk straight to the tax office to say, hey, this charity is registering. They're also at the same time registering for DGR. And can you endorse this particular charity? The ATO will look very closely at that constitution, and it is more likely than not that the ATO will come back to you at the time of DGR registration and want to know more detail and have more questions about your operation and exactly what you're doing, and you know where what your charity is about, and ask you more questions about your business to make that determination. If you consider seeking DGR status either at the time of registration or subsequent to that, and in a few years to come, you might decide to seek DGR status, I would advise getting some professional help to help you with that. Your constitution or your rules will have to change. There are certain clauses required in your constitution for DGR status, in particular clauses around, well, if the company or the association winds up, what happens to those funds that have been raised as DGR funds? What happens to them? They want to see the wording in the constitution for that. So it's kind of a higher level, if you like, of charity endorsement. It gives you that benefit of being able to raise funds and promote that they are a tax deduction. And the reason I raise this today is because so many not-for-profits out there believe, hey, I'm a not-for-profit, hey, I'm a charity, I can do this. I can tell everybody, donate to me, and it's a tax deduction. And there's believe it or not, quite a big level of misunderstanding around this particular point, and that's why we mention it today. So not-for-profit means I don't make a profit. Many not-for-profits believe that it is wrong to make a profit, or what we call in not-for-profit terms, we don't generally call it a profit, we call it a surplus. And we don't call a loss, we call it a deficit. But many not-for-profits believe that it is wrong to make a profit. And this is a misplaced view, folks. The only difference between a for-profit commercial organisation and a not-for-profit is that a surplus in the not-for-profit cannot be given back to members. Instead, it is reinvested back into the business for the purposes of delivering on your social purpose for years to come. So it's about reinvesting it back into your business so that you can continue to do good, basically. That is the only difference. It is not illegal to make a profit. It is not wrong to make a profit. Culturally, within some not-for-profits that I've worked with, there is a view that we don't have to worry about good commercial decision making and good commercial practice because we are a not-for-profit and we're not to make a profit. And that's a view that pervades different levels of not-for-profit organizations at times, from my observation with some organization. And that view is incorrect. You know, not-for-profits can still go broke. Not-for-profits can still end up in receivership if they can't pay their bills. They still have those requirements on directors to make sure that they pay their bills as and when they fall due. And so it is very important that not-for-profits do everything they can to generate a surplus and to make a profit. As I said, the only difference is that profit is not returned back to members like it is in a commercial organizations. The term not-for-profit, I think, is the problem out there. I think the term for-purpose says a lot more about an organization than not-for-profit, because a not-for-profit really talks more about the organization's tax status than what it stands for. And this is where sometimes the confusion lies. But certainly, it is not wrong to make a profit. In fact, you know, you should be doing everything you can to make a surplus so that you can continue to do the good work that you do in years to come. So in summary, all charities are not-for-profits. That's true. But not all not-for-profits are charities. You have to register with the ACNC and the ATO to be a charity. And with that, get the benefits of being a charity, the tax benefits of being that. Only charities with a DGR status can raise funds promoting tax-deductible donations or tax-deductible gifts. We call that DGR. It goes without saying, and I probably should emphasize it here, you have to be a charity to get DGR status. So you can't be a not-for-profit that's not registered as a charity to get DGR status, okay? The term not-for-profit does not mean it's okay to make a loss or even that it is a bad thing to make a surplus. That is a myth that should be dispelled, and it should mean that all not-for-profits need to employ a certain amount of commercial expertise within their organisation to ensure that they're doing what they do well for years to come, and to do that, pay their debts, pay their bills, pay their staff, that type of thing. So with that, any questions? We hope that this encourages you to perhaps jump on to our future webinars that we have about, as we said, every Tuesday in the next fortnight, and subsequent to that for the next 8 sessions. Any questions?
Derek, I've got some questions that have come through. There's a couple of them, which is great to see because it means people are listening, which is marvellous.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference between a committee member and a director in my responsibilities?
Okay, the difference really is what you call them. The director is the usual term that's applied to a company governed by ASIC. So in the not-for-profit terms, it's typically what's called a company limited by guarantee, and they have boards and they have directors. Associations tend to use the term committee and committee members. Now, you can actually call, your committee, you can call it a board and you can call them directors when you're an association. From a duties and responsibilities point of view, there's no difference. Sure, directors of a company limited by guarantee are governed by the Corporations Act, and they have certain responsibilities there for care and due diligence and such, to not trade whilst insolvent, to act in the best interests. Those duties apply equally to whether you're on a committee of an association which is governed by a state government. They apply. They just don't apply under the Corporations Act. They apply under common law, and they also required under the standards of governance from the ACNC, and probably the state government as well will have its own standards of governance, and the tax office has its standards of governance as well. Everybody has their own standards of governance, but principally, if you are on a board and it's association, you are, as we say in governance, boards make decisions, but directors and committee members are held individually accountable and in some cases liable for the decisions those boards make. And that's equally true. And it's a really good question from where that came from, Judy, because I hear that all the time from committee members who are wonderful volunteers who go on to not-for-profits and believing that they're not personally exposed as being a director, and that's not the case. Because you're not for profit and because you're volunteered, you're just the same as being a director on BHP, where you paid a couple of $100,000 to be on the board. You're equally exposed.
In the audit circles, we very much have a mentality of you can call yourself a committee member or a director. You can also call yourself an Oompa Loompa. You are still responsible for the governance of the organisation.
And I think just going on from that as well, just because you're called that, you could actually be deemed as being a director through your involvement or your actions or decisions that you made. If you influence a board or influence a chair, or if you attend board meetings but are not officially put onto that board or committee, you may be seen as being a shadow or de facto director under law. So, yeah, just because you're called those things doesn't mean that you're not responsible, basically. That's my summary, the answer to that.
Another question that we also have is, how do I find out if my organisation is a charity or just a not-for-profit?
That's a good question, because this came up not long ago, where I had an organisation I was working with, and they assumed they were a charity. They assumed that they were fully endorsed as a charity and such. When I went and looked them up, and this is the way to find that out, is you can do a search on the ACNC's website, and they came up that they'd been deregistered. And then that was a complex organisation, had different connections at different organisations, and a whole lot of their different entities in different states didn't come up as being registered or had been deregistered with the ACNC. So to find out, just go and do a search on the ACNC. You can either search with the ABN or you search with your name and see if it comes up.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's really important that you understand that whether you're a charity or a not-for-profit, and to make sure you genuinely are and you are still registered. All you need is public officer to have an address change, and you can lose a lot of information, which is really unfortunate.
Those things happen, Judy. Those things happen as organisations go on, as the years progress. All this stuff gets lost, and communication gets lost, and the exact status of the organisation to directors becomes unknown. And and I've even seen it with companies limited by guarantee, where I've done webinars like this for an entire board, and when I've done a search on ASIC, I found that none of those people actually registered as the directors.
Absolutely.
And these things happen.
And the directors' IDs have now made it even more curly. I do have one last question, but I think I would rather we post this on Facebook, because it's actually a lot more complex than I think our lovely anonymous soul understands. Is what terms should I look for in my constitution so I can be registered as a charity? I think that's probably a little too complex.
I could only give a general answer to that.
Yes, it is.
It's
Sorry, John?
Sorry, yes, it was. It confused me straight away.
Yeah, it's a
it's
little more complex.
Explaining.
It's definitely I can only give a general answer to a very specific question there. And I have experience in helping not-for-profits write their social purpose that will hopefully fly through the ACNC, and there is a particular way to do it. Less is more. Stick to bullet points and get specific about what you're doing. That you don't get lost in the paddock or in the trees on writing your social purpose. Okay.
So yeah, we might do a more detailed sort of response to that. I think that's actually a very complex question, and not really something that we can answer in today's.
Certainly, if anyone's got a specific instance and they need some help with that, please get in touch with us and see if we can help.
Absolutely. Did anybody have any further questions? I didn't see any more come through. Well, I'm going to regard that as a wrap. Derek, do you have a list of our upcoming webinars?
Yep, I just stopped sharing, but I'll quickly share that again. And yep, so the next one we're going to talk about is the best structure for a not-for-profit. And again, there are some very strong recommendations I would have on that for different applications of your business and different types of business. So we're going to talk about that the next one, which again is probably the most common question that I've been getting in the recent year or two about not-for-profits at the moment. Then we're going to move to social purpose. As I said, you've probably seen today I've laboured this point, but it is a very important point about getting that right within the Constitution or within your rules. Then we're going to talk some basic principles of governance. People, particularly not-for-profits, we find we have people who are both directors and they're managers and they're also members and stuff, but it doesn't change the fact that there are different roles in governance, and what is the basic principles of the fiduciary responsibility. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about what makes for a good constitution, sort of rolls on from number 3. Then Then we're going to talk about boards, executive committees, directors. Matt, how do they all differ? You know, what's the role of a board? What's the role of a director or a committee member? Then we're going to get into some hard sort of black and white stuff here about duties and responsibilities with respect to directors. And then finally, a big grey area, conflicts of interest. They're bad, right? So, I mean, we've posed all these as questions. And what we intend to do with these webinars is answer these questions and hopefully fill in some blanks and dispel some myths along the way.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for all that, Derek. Well, we have no further questions for today. I'd like to thank everybody for attending our very, very first inaugural. I don't have champagne or streamers, unfortunately, to say thank you very much for joining us. And we're looking forward to seeing everybody at our very next meeting. So thank you kindly, everyone. Have a great day.
That was excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. See you
Thanks,
later.
guys.
Bye. Okay.
Stop the recording.
Oh.